Welcome everyone to the report back from the 2022 WILPF International Congress. I'm Darian DeLue, President of WILPF US and head of the US delegation. I welcome you all to our program tonight. I have previously put up the program as part of the screen share, and I'll do that again after a little bit. We will have about half an hour for questions and answers from the audience, and we'll be hearing from most of our delegation. It's really wonderful to see people I've known for a long time, like Dolores Toller, and people who are newer to me, like Deline, whose last name I'm not going to try to pronounce. So welcome everyone, the full range of people. I wanted to remind people that WILPF US is part of the WILPF International, as the name Women's International League for Peace and Freedom indicates. We are an international organization. So we are reporting back tonight on the Triennial Congress of WILPF International. Obviously, for those who have been tracking these things, the Triennial Congress this year was not every 3 years from the last Triennial Congress. It was delayed a full year as we came to terms with COVID, and the International WILPF decided to do the Congress virtually. This was the first time we had had an international virtual Congress, and we'll be hearing in the report back tonight about some of the pros and cons of that. Mostly we'll talk about the pros. Before we actually get started with the report back, I have the pleasure of introducing our delegation. So I want to just introduce people by name, and when you're introduced, you can nod. Mary Hanson Harrison was one of our delegates. Mary is our past president. She's currently active on a number of WILPF US committees, as well as being a fundraiser for WILPF US. And she'll be, well, I'll show the program afterwards. Another delegate besides myself was Barbara Nielsen. Barbara Nielsen was and Barbara, if you are able to show yourself, that's great. Otherwise, we'll see your little picture. Barbara is a past board member. She was a program committee chair. She's active on the Bylaws committee and there you go, and in other WILPF contexts. So Barbara will tell us about resolutions because she was the person in charge of the resolution presentation. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, additionally, our other delegate, Dee Murphy, maybe you can show yourself. Dee Murphy is a relatively new member of WILPF. She was our fourth delegate, and there's Dee. She's currently organizing the new issue committee, Domestic Prisoners of War. I'm looking forward to an e-news article and other items from DPOW in the upcoming months. Thank you, Dee. Also on our delegation, you just met, along with myself, the delegates who had votes. In addition to the delegates, we had the alternates. One of our alternates was Jane, or Cricket, Doyle, and I don't think Jane has been able to join us tonight. She's in Canada visiting her family in the countryside, and I don't see her in the list of participants. She wasn't sure if they would have internet access. Another of our alternates was is Diane Blay. Diane is looking at us stoically because she's going to put together a report from her first ever Congress experience, international Congress experience, Diane is also the chair of our the convener of our virtual branch, the Jane Addams branch, and she does a spectacular job keeping information flowing to the members of the virtual branch. Let's see, we also had another alternate, and Ellen, maybe you can show yourself. Oh, you have. I can't tell your picture from you. It's a very accurate picture. That's Ellen Thomas. Many of you will know Ellen Thomas because she's the chair of the Disarm Committee. She's on the board as the Personnel Committee chair. She's also involved in a variety of other activities with WILPF US, including the WILPF Smart Facebook page, which has a lot of wonderful items on it. So maybe at some point, Ellen will put the WILPF Smart Facebook page URL in the chat for those of you who have not had a chance to see it before. Okay, and I am wanting to introduce our one other alternate. Who have I forgotten? Diane, Ellen, Cricket, and
Teresa resigned before the Congress.
Yes, we had another delegate, and I have to refer to my program list to be reminded of who it was. My apologies, folks. Oh, Odile, of course. Odile Huguenot Haber is unable to be with us tonight. She's in France. We have a few globe-trotting WILPFers, but seriously, Odile is helping take care of a family member who needs assistance in France. Also, I considered Janet Slaughter to be part of our delegation, and I know Janet is here. There you are, Janet. Janet Slaughter at this Congress was elected to be the Americas region representative. So she'll be talking to us briefly tonight, which will be excellent. And before the Congress, Janet was already the alternate to the Americas region representative. The former Americas region representative was Beatrice Schultes, and Janet and Beatrice did a little do-si-do, so that Janet is now the representative and Beatrice is now the alternate. And I did want to acknowledge Teresa El-Amin, who had applied to be on the delegation and was accepted as a delegate. However, she decided that it wasn't working out for her to be on the delegation. So she was very involved at the Congress, an active participant in the business sessions. She also presented a resolution on the United Nations Decade for Peoples of African Descent, or something close to that. And we'll hear more about that particular resolution when we have the reports on resolutions. So we now have over 40 people. That's pretty spectacular. I'm going to put up the program one more time, and then we're going to get started with the actual presentations. So on our program tonight, you see introductions. We're going to hear from Diane. Then we're going to hear from Janet, followed by Dee. Odile, we weren't sure if she could make it, so Barbara will be covering all the resolutions. Then Ellen, and again, Cricket will not be able to be speaking, but she might join us for the question and answers. I'll wrap things up talking very briefly about the Constitution and Bylaws changes, and Mary Hanson Harrison will be talking about the elections and the new IB members. One of the new IB members, just a moment, and one of the new IB members is Melissa Torres. Melissa is not new, of course. She was vice president on the last international board, and she was elected to be vice president for the current international board. She's from the U.S. section. Okay, excuse me a moment. Thought we go ahead and get started with Diane.
Okay, hi everybody. I just am going to give a brief intro as to how breaking into this. So on April 11th, Darian wrote to the branch's listserv about applying to be a delegate. And then there was an e-alert on April 12th. And then there was another branch's listserv notice on the 13th. And then the delegates were announced at the end of April because they had to be in by May 1st. And she did list the 4 delegates and the 4 alternates. And then on May 7th, we were told about that we would be using Canopy as a way that they were going to be running the whole Congress. And then on May 10th, Darian set up a listserv for the delegation so we could communicate with each other and set up the different meetings before the Congress. So on May 16th, 2 months before the Congress started, registration was opened, but there were problems. We had problems registering. So we were going to register as a group, but that didn't happen. So then we registered individually and there were problems with that, but eventually we all registered. So then we had 5 meetings as a group. And the first one was at the end of May. And then we had 2 in June and 2 in July in preparation for this. And I just want to say, when we registered, we had to agree to the following, that we would be open and have an inclusive space to learn and collaborate. We would have active listening and model our feminist values. So that was understood when we registered, that we would follow these guidelines during the Congress. So on May 24th, we basically were discussing resolutions, and then the international program came out. The English version was first, and we're happy about that. And so we discussed that in June. And then in July, the nominating committee update came out. And so we saw a list of all the applicants for the different positions. And in the next 2 meetings, that was pretty much a major focus of our discussions. So that kind of summarizes the whole lead up to the Congress. And that's my intro. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize, Diane. I had the screen share up the whole time. I'm going to take it down now, and yeek, I think I'll take it down. There we go. So thank you very much, Diane, and that gives people an inkling of being a delegate and being an alternate is serious work for the Congress. And yeek, how do I shut this thing up? Okay. Sorry, folks. I'm timing people, and our next presenter will be Janet Slaughter, who's going to give us some background on how things are working with international. There were some challenges at the Congress, and Janet will tell us more about it. Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, hopefully I will do that latter thing, but we'll see. I want to ask you to think about, while I'm talking, what is your understanding of what International WILPF does, right? If you had to write down, what do you think International WILPF does? I wonder what would be on your list. I have found in the past 4 years on the International Board, when I report back about International, that very few US members know much about it. We know that historically, WILPF has been an organization that is based in what its members do. Our advocacy, the specific projects we design with respect to actions to stop wars, to at least shrink militaries, to get rid of nukes, to remake national budgets, to transform societies to be equitable in terms of race, class, gender, abilities, ethnicities, religions, etc., to reconfigure our production and consumption patterns so as not to kill ourselves and other beings off. That's the kind of work we do. International WILPF works in part through the United Nations in Geneva and New York. We have offices in both places. This is part of WILPF's long history. So the International Secretariat has several staff members whose jobs are to lobby the United Nations, the European Union, and other organizations on behalf of peaceful transformations broadly defined. And also they work to draft United Nations, etc., policies that do that, like, for example, the Treaty on the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons. And some of WILPF's international budget comes from UN grants. Now, there was a time when the international staff consisted of our director, based in Geneva, and a sometimes even part-time staff of one, period. This might sound familiar to Darian because this is kind of what US national staffing is like. Recently, our organization has been transformed. I don't yet know all the particulars of this history, into a much larger NGO that employs more than 40 people who work not only in our offices in Geneva and New York, but also we have an office in London. We have at least one employee in Bosnia, and there are employees in other countries. In addition, WILPF hires people, sometimes WILPF leaders in our sections, to work on projects. But the organization itself, in my view, has been radically transformed. WILPF used to be supported by our dues and WILPFers' donations and bequests, which is kind of like how WILPF US still functions. By 2018, dues represented only 2% of International WILPF's budget. Now they represent about 1/2%. Now I'm going to make a claim that the transformation of WILPF, just to state it out baldly right away, that the transformation of WILPF looks like this, that WILPF has become primarily a means of transferring money from governments and foundations to selected sections and also to organizations that WILPF partners with. Government funds represent at least 60% of WILPF's funding, and WILPF has an annual budget of around $5 million to $6 million. It varies from year to year. Among governments, Sweden is the most prominent. Other governments who typically fund WILPF are Norway, Great Britain, Denmark. You can see a pattern here. And there have been some other major government donors too, for example, Germany from time to time. And there are a couple of big foundations that we get money from too. In the international board, one would think that representatives would be briefed on how this works, and also on why the Secretariat makes the decisions it does about which projects to develop. But we are not informed about this, let alone consulted about which directions WILPF should be moving. This is another way the organization has been transformed. Decisions about funding are not brought to the IB. We only receive reports about what grants have been received and how they will be used. So it sometimes feels in the International Board that the Secretariat thinks of us as a necessary evil. We are required by the Constitution, but we really ought not to interfere. And I have a bunch of evidence for this. One example I'm going to give you, I have a bunch of them, but I'll just talk about two. If you look at the international program that has been approved for the new period, 2022 to 2025, Many of you who are on this call worked with me to submit the US section's vision of what should be included in the international program. But if you look at what emerged as the international program, what was approved, you will see that none of the specific measures that we suggested, 7 pages of them, have been included. Another thing, piece of evidence that's important is that international board members, who are supposed to be the link between international and members in sections, are not even informed when WILPF International sends representatives to their countries on WILPF business, let alone consulted, not informed, let alone consulted. And several IB members have stories about this. Well, this raises questions why. Why does it work this way? In my 4 years on the IB so far, trying to understand the recurrent themes on which more traditional WILPF members and new members and staff disagree, I have come to the conclusion that those of us who see WILPF as a continuation of its earlier design are mistaken. The transformation that has enabled WILPF to grow in terms of staff and in numbers of sections has also meant that it has become more distant from its members. Okay. Instead of the International Secretariat staff representing members' ideas and initiatives, it more and more represents the kinds of projects that donors are willing to fund. This is very important. So, for example, currently donors are interested in funding projects in the Middle East and Africa. These projects are not grassroots, bottom up, and that's what WILPF, at least in the US section, looks like. But they're defined by government agencies or other NGOs that WILPF works with who have been successful in getting money, or governments who want to distribute money. So what much of the funding WILPF receives is ad hoc, is related to whatever is popular among likely funders or among some of our partners. For example, there is a big project, this was reported on, there was a session on this at the International Congress on Stop Killer Robots. 8 countries in Africa have received grants from WILPF to work on this issue, okay? Now, there are not, so far, killer robots in Africa. This is interesting. But this is to make sure that killer robots don't go there. And I think the biggest value of this program is that it teaches women how to lobby government officials. So there are 8 sections in Africa who are currently receiving grants to do this kind of work. This is not something that was built from the bottom up, but the money was available. And so some women in African sections were notified of this. And this became one of the ways to build more sections in Africa. You can get a grant that will fund people if you will work on this issue. Okay. The other thing that I want to say is that we see changes in staffing of international that reflect this change in direction.
1 minute left.
Okay, so most of the people who work on staff are women in their, I would say, 30s and 40s who have university degrees in courses like management and business administration, and some of them specifically in how to manage NGOs. They are very competent, but they don't come from activist backgrounds. And so while many of them already assume the values that we hold, they don't have any experience in grassroots organizing. So they want to emphasize, here's how you get the grant, here's how you have to deal with that grant, here's how you interface with grantees. It's all very practical. So this means that there are generational divides in the organization, but I would say it's more than that. It's a mindset that says we have to adapt the organization to the monies that are available. Because one of the things that organizations do is try to preserve themselves. So you hire people in, and then people want to keep their jobs. So that means you have to keep getting these grants. So the more these people keep being employed. And I think that, you know, among the staff of the Secretariat, there is a consensus that, you know, well, this is how NGOs work these days. And so this is what we do. But there hasn't been a kind of an interface with members that explains this. And so my question, I've got a lot more to say, but my question is, you know, what do you think about this? Now, there are some good reasons why people are employed, and that has to do with race and class. We have to admit that originally WILPF was established by women who were relatively wealthy and propertied.
So
And
Janet,
we need to figure out what kinds of changes do we need to make that pay people, but that doesn't mean then that people on the payroll do not question how the organization operates.
thank you, Janet. Yes, and that's some vital background information for us to be thinking about, that people are welcome to make brief comments when we get to question and answer. So Teresa, we aren't taking comments until question and answer. Thank you. And going from the macro, the whole WILPF international organization, to a more micro level, Dee Murphy is going to tell us about how it works with the new African sections and some personal glimpse of the African sections. Dee?
Hi, everyone. So this was my first international Congress, and I found it to be a very exciting endeavor, as well as it appeared many of the newer members who are members of new groups and sections. So the Congress opened with greetings. It was so beautiful, from 14 sections. And I'm going to list them all, and I'm going to list them all for a reason. Many sent wonderful videos introducing themselves. Some people had songs and dances, and it was just amazing to watch. But the 14 sections that contributed to the opening were New Zealand, Australia, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Denmark, Democratic Republic of Congo, India, Japan, Niger, Senegal, Spain, Sweden, Togo, and the US. So during the International Congress, 10 new sections were approved. And of the 10 new sections, 8 of them were from Africa. The 10 new sections were Argentina, Austria, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Central African Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Niger, Sudan, Togo. And so of these 10, Burkina Faso is in West Africa. I'm getting a lot of education on that continent through this Congress. Burundi, Southeast Africa. The Central African Republic is in Central Africa. Cote d'Ivoire is in the southern coast of West Africa. Guinea is in West Africa. Niger is in West Africa. Sudan is East Africa. Liberia, Togo is in Liberia, which is West African. So as people came in, like I said, there was a lot of excitement. I saw the people that were there had actually made up big banners, especially from Africa. They had made up these great big banners. Some of them were hand painted, some of them were printed out, and they were just so excited, the people that were there to have their become a part of WILPF and be involved with WILPF. Some of the people that are newer from poorer countries expressed real issues with being able to, concerns about how they could participate and manage. And so some of the problems that were told were, like Burkina Faso spoke about a recent incident where there was a crisis and 60 people came to the WILPF leader's home. So she expressed that they need more support from WILPF and as she called it, contingencies in catastrophic situations. There were problems with finding locations to house themselves from, having to share that. Opening bank accounts without having to share it with other groups and things like that. So when I hear about what Janet just said about, the kind of imbalance of who was contributing, I would like to just share my screen for a second, if permitted.
Yes, you can do it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that then. So we'll start with the continent here, so you can see all the countries that have come in, and hope that didn't pop up, and where they're located.
We have a map of Africa.
Yes, and that's where everyone's from. I just read where they are in the listing of countries, but here's what I wanted to share. Can everyone see the list
Yes.
of WILPF sections?
Yes,
So 41 sections and 5 groups. And so from Africa now, we have 18 sections. Asia Pacific has 3. South Asia has 4. Middle East 2. Europe 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. And the Americas have 6. So in addition to the new sections, some new groups were also approved. See if I can find that again. And the new groups are that are forming, that are about to become sections or trying to become sections, are Senegal, which is in West Africa, Sierra Leone, which is in Southwest, Sri Lanka, South Africa, and Yemen. So these are budding, emerging groups. And I think it's important to, understand the energy that comes out of this, and why I think it's important to pay attention to the emerging groups that are coming out there. As you can see with the 18 different sections and groups there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of, help that is needed in order to, a lot of these are very extremely poor countries. I mean, they're war torn, they're poor, and they're trying to help the women there, and they're very enthusiastic about being a part of WILPF because they see help for their countries. And a lot of the activists there have been working on the ground to try to help people. I mean, 60 people coming to one leader's home should kind of, lay out the groundwork there and the foundations. I'm not sure how sustainable a lot of this will be over time, because there are so many poor people that are coming in, representatives, representing really extremely poor areas in WILPF, but they are asking for a lot of help in order to gain the strength needed for peace in Africa. Opportunities is another thing I'm supposed to cover with the International Congress and WILPF. We have to look at the population of the entire continent of Africa. It's like 1.2 billion. US has 331 million people.
1 million.
Nigeria has the largest economy. And they also have the youngest. They're 41% of their population is under the age of 15. So they're growing rapidly. It's projected to see what's going to happen, but in 2009 census, they had doubled in size in 27 years. And so our new president is from Cameroon, Jacqueline Ngonmo, and we just had a president from Africa, who is Joy Ansanye. So I'm really curious to see, I have not had the time to do the research, but I'm really curious to see how many international WILPF presidents have come from Africa. And I'm very encouraged by the growth of WILPF US section, or the WILPF section in Africa. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Dee. And I can say right now, we have had 2 WILPF presidents from Africa. We didn't really have African sections before the last few years, except North Africa. Okay, thank you so much for giving us an idea about the diversity of WILPF International. I welcome Barbara Nielsen. I don't think Odile is on the call. Odile, if you're here, please speak up. Barbara will be reporting to us on the resolutions, including the 4 resolutions from the United States. Barbara?
Thank you. As I was listening to the first 2 speakers, it occurred to me that if you haven't been to, if you're a new WILPF member in the United States section, and if you have not ever been to an International WILPF Congress, you might not know that the International Congress is the highest decision-making body in WILPF, period. We have a board that is now a representative board. It used to be that every country that was a section had a representative on the international board. So we had like 40 members, which was changed when we were in Ghana 4 years ago. And we now have 6 regional representatives from around the world. And the US is one of 7 countries in the Americas region. And it's not been without controversy to have these regions, but there you are. And so we have delegates from each of the sections coming together, usually every 3 years. That's why it's called a triennial. COVID screwed up both our US Congress and the international. But we get together to make decisions. And that's what the voting delegation is about. You get a number of delegates based on the number of paid members you have in your section. And the United States got 4 this term. So that's what we were all doing there, basically, besides going to workshops that were a lot of fun and informative. There were plenaries, just as there are in regular US triennial congresses, where the members make decisions on things, pass resolutions, and vote on new elected officers and other positions. And so that's what this Congress was really all about. And if you looked in the chat, I think there are 9 entries. I combined a couple of them. If you want to see both the documents that were generated, the documents that indicate what happened, copies of the transcripts, copies of the PowerPoints, you can do all that if you're registered on the international website, which is wilpf.org. If you're registered for something called My WILPF. And Darian and I were just talking today. I may do an article on for the e-news that goes over briefly how to find things about the Congress. But in our chat, if you save your chat, you can also get how to register for My WILPF. And once you're a registered user of My WILPF, you can go and get the documents that we've been making reference to and see what happened during the voting process and all that kind of stuff. So I understand that I wasn't really thought to be talking about that, but as I was listening, I realized I knew what Janet was talking about, and I knew the gist of what Dee was talking about, because I have a sense, because I've been fortunate enough to be a delegate for 3 of the last 3 Congresses, of why we do this, and the fact that it's basically a huge business meeting of great importance to the organization that is normally in person, but it wasn't. One of the cool things about an international Congress, just as a regular WILPF US Congress, is that if we are having business meetings or plenary sessions, we also can have resolutions. And at the international level in particular, but also at the US level, our resolutions are not about WILPF. The resolutions are to be about WILPF's interactions with the rest of the world and what we want to do to make the world a better place. The process for resolutions at international was a little different this year. What wasn't different is each section, members of each section could come up with a resolution or more than one that they wanted to be discussed by the delegations at the Congress and approved. One of the things that we talked about since 2015 and our Centennial Congress was that just as in the US, we tend to get very excited about resolutions, we pass them, and then they sit there and they look really good on paper, but we often don't follow through. And so starting in 2015 and then in 18 in Ghana, in particular, there was the beginning of a mandate that resolutions on paper aren't really good enough. We need to move forward in action. We talked about it in Ghana, but this year in particular, 4 years later, there was more of a push to make sure that the resolutions had stronger action steps. And this year, for the first time, I was more aware myself of involvement with the staff at the International Secretariat, involvement also with the WILPF members who are involved in the Congress Committee and who sit on the International Board to make sure that we had action steps built in. And there was a lot of discussion back and forth about how realistic our resolutions were. Our resolutions were ad hoc resolutions, meaning that they could be on any topic as long as it was in the greater world. We did have something that we called the statement of support. 4 years ago, it was brought to our attention that there is a woman whose name is Milagros Sala, who has had a terrible life, and her human rights have been grossly abused. And we passed a statement of support then, and we had it.
1 minute.
Thank you. We had a statement of support here too. This is 1 minute for how much time, Darian?
That's 1 minute of the 8 minutes.
Okay, since I'm covering both, that I will do my best to go through the resolutions right now. I will tell you the end of our story on resolutions first, because I'm sure some of you are sitting there wondering with bated breath, what was the outcome? Of the 7 resolutions that were presented, including this one that was a statement, the Congress approved all of them. There was some last minute wordsmithing on various things to be done, but the resolutions were a rousing success. And I think the sponsors felt that they were strongly supported by the people running the Congress this time. We had a I'm going to read the names of the resolutions. What you will see if you go to, or when you go to my WILPF, you will be able to read all of the details about the resolutions. A resolution on the situation of indigenous and environmental defenders in Brazil. Resolution supporting the International Decade for People of African Descent. That was a US resolution. Resolution break down impacts on women and women's role in governance. was another resolution. This is also talking about CEDAW. And interestingly enough, I do not have the sponsors listed here, and I apologize. Facilitation of visas for women activists to enjoy their right to participate in international meetings. This is another one from the US that was it's a very interesting resolution. Another one, global cooperation for the health of the planet. This was a Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance resolution that has a lot to do with vaccinations and other things, including also blockades on certain countries by the US. The other resolution that Odile was going to speak about in particular is from the Middle East Peace and Justice Action Committee, and it is a resolution on a Middle East weapons of mass destruction free zone, which also calls for a conference to be sponsored in part by the International Secretariat. The idea is, in fact, to help Middle East countries and our sections in the Middle East and elsewhere
About 30 seconds.
Get more action going forward on not just a nuclear weapons free zone, but weapons of mass destruction free zone. And I will close on reminding everybody that the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is the 5th of 5 of the United Nations treaties that deal with weapons of mass destruction that are prohibited on the basis of humanitarian grounds. Starting many years ago, and it was groundbreaking then, and the TPNW, of course, was the most extraordinary of the 5 that we are working on. So thank you very much. If you have questions, you can always contact me later. Thank you, Darian.
Thank you. And I did mention before that Teresa El-Amin had sponsored a resolution on the UN decade for people of African descent, which continues for another 2 years. And the resolution calls for a number of support activities by all sections within International. I hope that people might have noticed that the US section presented about half of the resolutions that were considered by the Congress. So we are a very active section, and I think that's great. Next, we're going to hear from Ellen Thomas, who's going to tell us how having a virtual Congress was different. Take it, Ellen. And thank you, Barbara.
Well, there isn't much that needs to be said about this. Obviously, a virtual Congress allows people to attend that would otherwise not be able to attend, which I think is a real plus. And however, the minus part of it is that you can't have the interpersonal conversations and getting to know each other that you have when you get together in person. Because it stretched across the entire globe, there were plenaries that were happening at all different times of the day and night, and you had to be a superwoman to be able to all of them. There may have been 1 or 2 people from US that managed to do that, and I have the greatest respect for them. But the good thing about the virtual program was that there were recordings of the ones that we missed, and so it was possible to look at it later. You weren't able to participate in the discussion if you were watching it as a recording, but at least you were able to see it. Also, the workshops in the in-person meetings, as I understand it, the workshops often conflict with each other. You had to choose one or the other. And in the virtual version, they were one after the other. So you could go to all of them if you so chose. And that was pretty much all that I could think of to jot down about this. If you have any thoughts about pros and cons, I invite you to put them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Yes, a number of us were pretty sleep deprived during the Congress, but it's very true. We didn't have any conflicts of sessions, and that was something. It was only conflicts with sleeping. Okay, as I mentioned before, Cricket Jane Doyle isn't here, and I will talk very briefly about the Constitution and bylaws. And I do want to provide a little background on this. In 2018, we passed the new constitution, or we passed a new constitution, which was quite a change from the old constitution. As was mentioned by Barbara, it set up the idea of having regions for the International Board instead of sections on the International Board. So under the old International Board, each section had a representative. There were 30 or 40 representative members of the International Board. Under the new International Board from the 2018 Congress, there were a total of 10 people on the International Board. That would be one region representative for each region, plus the president, the two vice presidents, and the treasurer. So this was quite a change, and we have been working with this new system for the last 4 years. This Congress was the first opportunity to make adjustments in that. There were various suggestions made for adjustments from the US section. However, most of those were not adopted as official amendments, and that's how the International Congress system works. Any new documents, ideas, the Constitution or bylaws have to be proposed months and months and months and months in advance, and then get discussed and considered and discussed and considered. I believe there were a total of 3 different iterations of the Constitution and bylaws. In the actual Constitution and bylaws that were passed at the Congress, there's something new, brand new. We have an advisory board. The advisory board is in many ways like the old International Board or IB. The advisory board has one person from each section sitting on it. The advisory board also meets 2 times a year. That was the meeting schedule for the old IB. These days, the IB, with the benefit of Zoom and such, is able to meet every other month for business, and in the alternate months, they're having political discussions, which is, I think, a very positive development. We often, I used to be the US member on the International Board under the old system, and we often bemoaned that we didn't have more time to talk about the political issues when we met only twice a year and usually only once a year in person, but that was for several days. In any case, the new advisory board will meet twice a year and will discuss various topics of interest to the advisory board members. They will be able to advise and suggest things to the actual International Board. They won't have any voting capacity. One thing for US section members to keep in mind is that the advisory board provides 2 new positions for WILPF US members who are interested in international work. We will be having an advisory board member from the US section, and we will have an alternate to the advisory board member from the US section. So the new Constitution and bylaws don't tell us how to select those people, and that's something for the Bylaws Committee and the US board, and then eventually you, the members of WILPF, to vote on how we might do that. So the advisory board is a very interesting and new idea, and it was probably the biggest change in the bylaws and Constitution. However, another big change is partly related to some of what Janet talked about. WILPF International has become a much bigger organization with a multi-million-dollar budget. This is very different from 10 years ago. That budget means that it really had become pretty difficult for the international treasurer to keep track of what was going on with international finances. Under the new constitution, there's a financial committee that will be keeping track of that. And I probably have my terminology slightly off, but that's close enough. The financial body will have official finance people keeping track of things and providing a report to the treasurer, and the treasurer's job is to review that report and approve it. So that's quite the change for the treasurer. Some amendment proposals were not passed, but one that did pass after some initial discussion is an interesting one. We heard from Janet about how some sections receive funding for various projects, and because many of the international board members who are the region reps are in sections that were getting funding, some of them were actually getting funding from the International Secretariat. The International Secretariat is the Secretary General, Madeleine Rees, and then the entire administrative structure of international. And the International Secretariat, as I say, has a multi-million-dollar budget that Madeleine Rees is primarily involved in distributing. So those regional representatives or other international board members who were receiving funds from the International Secretariat were in a bind. There was some conflict of interest in terms of when they had to vote on something on the international board, they might reasonably have felt conflicted about, well, I don't want to vote against the International Secretariat. Under the changes in the new bylaws and constitution, all of the IB members who receive any funds from international will have to declare that they are receiving funds, will have to recuse themselves in some cases, and in other cases, they'll also be signing a conflict of interest agreement. So that will perhaps have an influence in the future. So those are some of the key changes. And finally, we're going to hear from Mary Hanson Harrison. In addition to her many roles in WILPF US, Mary was appointed to be a member of the International Nominations Committee, which is responsible for handling the nominations for the International Board. She'll be telling you more about the elections, and take it, Mary. And after Mary, we'll have questions and answers.
Yes, thank you. It's good to see everybody here, and I want to make sure that you get to know a little bit about who the nomination committee was, because I think it's very important. And we had a great sense of camaraderie, and we didn't know each other very well, but we didn't agree either all the time. But we have managed to be a consistent and I should say, really tried very, very hard to project the real meaning of peace women around the table. We had women from Togo, our convener, Iolia Amali is from Ghana, Italy, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, Australia, and the USA. And as I said, we didn't know each other. We did by the end know a good deal about how we view the future. And we were interested particularly in assessing our nominees, and in a way that we were our purview was to investigate and to not adjudicate, not say who's the best, but we are to give an even-handed, and we'll come back to that, an even-handed chance for everybody who wants to apply. And in doing that, we had a nomination form, we had a supporting statement, and we would have the require the CV or resume from the applicants. So we had a chance for the sections to support them, and also a chance to hear the voice of the candidate and to see how she would or had offered herself up to the vision of what WILPF stands for, particularly in her resume. We had 3 guiding principles. Now, this was new. They've never done this before because we started out with a blank slate. We didn't have any materials from previous nomination committees. So what we tried to do were to have some guiding principles that would allow us to have, we thought, the most equitable return. The first was transparency. That since I said there was no precedent before us, we wanted to make sure that that we would be able to give the future a written document and a way to see how we assessed the candidates. Another one is, as I said, the even-handedness of this. We wanted to make sure that everybody had an even chance as much as possible. Because no matter if you were a star or or not, what you did counts. Every one of our applicants, we made sure that we had a set of criteria, and we had an assessment template, and they had about 6 assessments. That what do we value? What did we find? And they were like attendance, leadership initiatives, skills and experiences. So each of these columns had a heading. And what we did was we looked at all the documents that the applicants had given us. We also read all the minutes for the 4 years. There were particularly 2 or 3 of us who did all of that work to see if indeed all of the claims that were made by the applicants and by the sections could be backed up. So it was we had 7 months to do this. We eventually sent out the criteria-laden investigative application form. And we had, because it was new, I think really, we had to extend it for 3 more weeks so people had all the chance they could to fill it out. Another thing is, as I said, it's really important that we look toward the future and that, again, we leave that paper trail and people can see how we judged. We often think now at the end that we would like now to be sure that the applications had a more wide-ranging and let's say equitable look than perhaps happened before. So having this process sent to, we had the template, we sent out the template to the IB to look over. The process was, as I said, new, and that had a bit of conflict that occurred. We made sure that that we had given them applicants enough time. We made sure that they had known that what documents they needed. They had, we had as much as we possibly could been open-minded and fair. We had problems with the sections, understanding the system. And we had this is separate from our investigation, but there was a whole drama about, as WILPF is often done in the past.
1 minute.
Okay. We had a whole drama of how the sections were being nominated and what happened to their process that they were to go through. We did come up with a slate of people, and we did have some that we deemed not qualified for various reasons, but there were 7 of us that sent that out. There was not any disagreement about that. And so the process then went to, we were under the old Constitution, and I can explain that later when somebody asks about this. Our findings go to an election committee. And that election committee has about 3 or 4 days, I'm not even sure that long, to decide if they accept these things, what are they going to do, if they're going to put up a slate. So there's a whole drama to putting up a slate. The slate wasn't accepted, so they opened up all of the election to all the applicants to be elected. That is, even the people we found not eligible. So that was our venture. It was a really big journey, and I tell you, would be proud of the other 6 women who really did so much work.
Thank you. And the job of the nominations committee is never interesting, and the whole complexities of the slate are very interesting. And that's part of the international constitution that we don't need to go into, most likely. Okay, we are ready to take questions, and I'm happy to call on Teresa Elamine first, because Teresa, you might want to say a little bit about your resolution, but you have the floor.
Well, thank you. How many minutes?
I'll give you 2 minutes. Mostly people will only get a minute.
Oh, well, if I could have 3, I would appreciate it. First of all, the Black Liberation Caucus submitted a workshop on equity and inclusion section by section. And while the National Board of the U.S. section does not recognize the Black Liberation Caucus, the International Secretariat has no such problem. And what I was struck by is the fact that the International Secretariat gave us tremendous support in getting the workshop done, and particularly Layla, who is the Deputy Secretary General. So what I'm struck by, Janet, is the fact that a feminist peacemaking bureaucracy is better than most bureaucracies. And as I said to Madeline Reese, I do have a bias against bureaucracies, but WILPF is a kind of two-legged bureaucracy in that the International Board, which Janet says works on policy, and the International Secretariat runs WILPF, which is really a threat to democratic rights. And that's what I noticed, because at the end, when there was a drama about what was going to happen with that investigation, so I would really appreciate hearing about what happened with the so-called investigation that the International Secretariat initiated. But I would like to say that the International Secretariat has 4 staff people for the MENA region. the Middle East, North Africa region. And those 4 staff people are working with me and George of the Black Liberation Caucus to put
1
on,
minute.
yes, to put on the Palestine and Lebanon webinar, which will happen on September 13th. And so it's been translated into Arabic, and all of this comes from support from the International Secretariat. So I would say in the feminist peacemaking world, the WILPF bureaucracy of the International Secretariat has been quite useful. And I will say that it was such an open opportunity for a shameless organizer like me, because I had no problem participating completely throughout the Congress. It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And I will mention that some of us had a harder time participating with the Congress than others. The Canopy platform worked for most people, but not for all people. I feel like I'm techie, but I was not able to get Canopy to work at all, and ended up not being able to use all the things that the, Canopy platform offered. And just to clarify, the U.S. Section Board does not see that the Black Liberation Caucus is an official part of WILPF US, but we certainly know that there is a Black Liberation Caucus. Okay, I don't see other hands up. Are there other questions or comments? I'll try looking for physical hands, but I really would like people to raise virtual hands if they would like to make a comment or ask a question, because it's easier to, okay, Cheryl. And then after Cheryl, Randy. Cheryl?
Yes, I put a couple of questions in the chat as they occurred to me. So one was to do with these resolutions that were more action oriented than usual. And I wonder how that will interact with the international program that Janet explained to us. I was one of those people who worked on that 7-page input we gave to the international program process. So the international program is mostly already set by a document that was provided by the Secretariat. And now we have these resolutions with actions that we've been asked that are demanded by the resolution. Can somebody explain? Are they going to go back and change the international program? So these actions.
So
thank you.
Let me jump in and invite Barbara. You're our resolution expert. Do you want to try to respond to this? You have 1 minute.
Sure. There on those aspects of the resolutions that can fit into the aspects that may be applicable on the international program, sure. But it may very well be that there are, in fact, I know there are several things in the resolutions that aren't specifically talked about in the international program. So they're not mutually exclusive. Ideally, there will be coordination between them. In some cases, I think people drafted the resolutions who were not necessarily involved in working on the international program document directly. As you remember, Cheryl, you and I were on lots of those calls over many months period of time.
Okay,
so there you are. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Okay, great. And I am trying to keep us on a tight schedule. So it'll be Randy, and after Randy, George, then Joan, then Janet. Randy.
Okay, so I wanted to ask about the rich countries and the poor countries. How is the international WILPF making sure that rich countries like the United States, Canada, some other countries are help out these poorer countries and help them strengthen their wills? And the other question is, I saw some countries on here that are absent that surely should be on here. And I wanted to know, how do you guys determine how the country gets membership into the WILPF International?
Okay, I'll answer that a little bit and then I'll give others a chance to say more. Countries become sections by taking action and actually applying to be a section. And by the way, Judith, I do see your hand up. So if you're able to raise your virtual hand, good, but if not, I'll get back to you. Okay, so I'll write you down. Some of the countries that you mentioned in the chat, Randy, do not have a group that wants to be an international section or a national section. It's up to the organizing and energy both of the individuals in the country and to some extent of WILPF International. Sometimes it'll go to a country and try to get something going. In terms of the poor countries helping the rich countries helping the poor countries, that doesn't happen. It's through international. International has the funds and distributes funds, but WILPF is not a service organization. We're not trying to uplift countries. We're trying to give people a political voice. Is there someone else from the delegation who wanted to take up to a minute to address this question?
Yeah.
I would like to as well.
Okay,
Nielsen as well.
Dee and then Barbara. And then George will be next, then Joan, then Janet, and then Judith. But Dee, go ahead.
So one of the things I neglected to mention in my part of the report was that we also had some sections that were suspended and dissolved. And those were Albania, Bolivia, France, Israel, Nepal, the Philippines, and Polynesia. Now, the reason that was given for this was because they were not meeting, they were not paying their section fees. Apparently, section fees are a major issue that's being worked on now. Some of them, it says they did a breach of criteria or which is set out in the Constitution and bylaws. So as Darian just said, a lot of the groups are doing the groundwork and they're putting things into place, and those are the ones that are applying to be sections. And I think regarding your question about the poorer versus richer countries, this is what a lot, I think, of the contention is, where people are pointing out that a lot of the European countries are footing the bill and kind of sideways kind of complaining about the process, or at least that's what I'm hearing. Is that the top-down structure is actually, I feel, walking the walk we talk in terms of advocating towards world peace by, trying to equalize and give other countries an opportunity for a voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over.
And Barbara.
So a couple things. Every section basically has a per member assessment that must go to international every year. So just really fast, in the United States, we have $35 fee. It used to be that we sent something like 17 or 19 of that to international every year. The fee varies. And recently, actually, international reduced the amount of the assessment. So it is not more than half of what our national $35 fee is. But nonetheless, and all of the sections have that as an obligation. But you also have to have a certain number of active members. And it isn't as if all of a sudden somebody's wiped off the planet in terms of their WILPF membership. Usually what happens is the membership dwindles. And in Nepal, when we were in Ghana, really fast, the huge earthquake in Nepal happened while we were in Ghana. And we had members from the Nepal section there who we put on a plane to go back to Ghana. From Ghana to Nepal. And those people just can't deal with WILPF right now. And so they couldn't, quote, rehabilitate themselves. And so they're not an active section now. Not everybody is quite as dramatic as that, but things happen locally. Okay, and some of it's financial, some of it's activism.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, George.
All right, so when it comes to the resolutions, and I thought Cheryl's question would answer this for me, but it didn't quite. But it probably is an answer you're going to try to give, Barbara. It's great that we have these action steps in the resolutions. How will we see those action steps implemented? And who is responsible for making it happen? Is it just the international? Is it the board here in the US? Because how I read it is every section needs to do these action steps. So how's that going to happen, and when can we expect to see those rolled out?
Thank you for such a concise question. And Janet, as our America's Region rep on the International Board, would you please answer that question? But please unmute, yes.
Yeah, I'll try.
Why?
There's, okay, a couple of things to say. One, a background statement. There was a strong sentiment this year not to allow resolutions at all. But several of us insisted, and what happened was that we became the ones who had to work on them. And it's supposed to be something the entire board works on, but only two people on the board, Jeanette McLeod and I, were willing to do that. So International is not particularly interested in resolutions based on something that Barbara said. You know, these are nice statements, but then what? So it's on the authors of the resolutions to make sure that something happens. You should not count on International doing anything unless you push. And it's a good idea to give suggestions. I mean, there were suggestions in the actions, but keep up the pressure because it's not on the top of their list.
Okay, so keep pushing and keep up the pressure. It's not on their priority list. Got it. Thanks. I'll take that back to the Black Liberation Caucus.
Thank you. Joan Goddard.
Yeah, my question is very brief. I didn't understand, Mary, at the end of what you said, when you were talking about the slate and how there had been the shorter recommended slate, and then it was to be open to all. And you said something about people who were or were not qualified. And I didn't understand whether you said it included the people that you had determined were not qualified, or whether it was everybody except those you had determined were not qualified. It's sort of, you know, I just didn't catch it in the midst of it. Maybe others did not either.
Okay, so Mary, if you can answer that concisely, this is a pretty complicated situation. But you have to unmute because we won't listen to you unless you do.
Okay, I was just having trouble with it. Yes, it did slide in there, didn't it, at the end? And I was going to illuminate a little bit more, but I ran out of time. Yes, the slate included people that we did not recommend.
Thank you. Did not recommend because you had determined they were not qualified. As opposed to the color of their hair or something.
That's where the problem lies. Because what can I say?
Well, maybe I should ask whether any of those people were elected.
Yes, they were.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Yes, they were elected.
Thank you.
Yes, and we had our criteria, we explained it very well. And there are various reasons that 7 of us thought those people did not.
At least they didn't turn in qualifications that showed.
Well, that some of that, yes. I have to be, you know, it's
right.
Yes, so we had a criteria and they did not meet it. Okay.
Thank you.
So let me also, Teresa asked about the investigation, and for those who may not know, there were a number of complaints in connection with the elections. The complaints were confidential, so we don't know what the complaints were. There was an investigation into the complaints, which is a very unusual action. And we have not heard at all yet what the findings of the investigation were. We did see an executive summary, but it was a lot like an executive summary, gave you an inkling that, yes, they found some things were wrong, but it didn't say quite what. Okay, so I promised Judith Hand that I would call on her, and then I will, Janet, were you trying to speak to this?
Yeah.
Okay, then before
yeah.
Judith, please be patient a moment, Judith.
Yeah, I would say, I think that the investigation with respect to the election should be considered to have been concluded, even though there were conflicting reports that emerged from the investigation. But I think that now that the election is over and has been certified, I doubt that that's going to reemerge. But there are ongoing investigations beyond that, which apparently will involve the same investigator. I don't know. It's a problem. We get a lot of accusations in the IB, and some of them are very ill-defined. We don't know who is being accused of what. Okay, but there are accusations, and we're told that we're very bad. And so there will be more investigations.
Okay, so I'm going to call on Judith, and after Judith, Dolores Toller. Judith.
Yeah, I think I have two quick questions. The first one is, what on the screen do I click or press to raise my hand? I didn't know how to do it.
Under reactions, you should find reactions at the bottom of your screen. When you click on reactions, it shows you a bunch of
now it says raise hand. It didn't do that before. Okay, sorry about that.
Fine, we learn.
Yeah, we learned. Second quick question was, I came to this meeting because I wanted to get a feeling for the overall structure of WILPF internationally, nationally, and this has been very, very helpful. This has been just terrific. However, I had been on the WILPF website, wilpf.org, reading up a little bit to get ready, and I'm on one of their pages called Shaping Future WILPF on the Road to Congress. And it says we're in the process of creating WILPF's next international program. I'm getting the impression that you guys have already done all of this. Is this page current? Because I was thinking, is it too late I wanted to contribute, but is it completely too late to contribute anything? Because it says it's going to take place on July 16 to 24 this year.
It's too late. Every 3 years.
Okay.
So that's an old page. There was an elaborate and wonderful process for getting input that they did this year.
Got it. Thank you. I told you it was a quick question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Dolores and then Barbara. Dolores?
Yes, I just had to unmute. It isn't clear to me, and perhaps you can clarify, what body sets the policy and guides the work of the Secretariat and the sections? And I mean, there's money received and then paid out, but are these for projects that fit in some way that whatever that policy document or action document is, and set by whom? It does not seem clear to me at the moment.
Janet, do you want to address that?
I heard several questions, Dolores. And if you could say which one, which policy are you referring to? Maybe start there.
Well, a project that is funded to do something, but it seems to me it has to come out of some policy of the organization.
Well,
And where does that, who's deciding that?
well, the Secretariat and its employees decide what projects they're interested in, and they will seek funding for, and then how they will do that. That's the international, you know, it's an important question whether the international board and or some other set of representatives of members should participate in that. But at present, we don't. We would like to, we on the board would like to. I have asked that we get copies when if you get a grant, you have to write a report to the granting agency, right? Say what you've done. So I know they write these reports, and I have asked that the board be sent copies. And I was told that's too much work. To me, it's only you know, you send an email and attach the report. That's all you do. So there's
We're all laughing, Janet.
why?
Yeah, and shaking our heads.
Yeah, it's very, transparency was identified in the, over the course of the global calls that we held from last August through about February on all issues relating to how International WILPF works. And the consultant said, transparency is one of your biggest issues. And so you can see how it's emerging here.
Yes.
I mean, the Congress has no say on what the policies are by which our action, from which our action is supposed to.
Well,
That's not true.
the Congress votes on changes to the Constitution and bylaws, and it did do that. So there's a committee there's a standing Constitution committee. And that committee considered amendments to the Constitution and bylaws, reported them out 2 or 3 different times. But that's, and then, so then there was a final version presented at Congress that had a couple of choices left within it that we got to vote for, we delegates got to vote for. But yeah, that's really it. And, you know, I want to say I'm with you here. I think members need to have more input on what the Secretariat does. And we need to know more. I feel very bad as a member of the IB, and I'm a very active member of the IB, that I cannot explain the projects that we fund to my constituents because they are not well explained on the website.
And I'm the one who is muted. Thank you, Dolores, for the good questions. And thank you, Janet. Barbara.
Yeah, Dolores, some things haven't changed very much since you were very active in the Berkeley branch. We have 2 different levels in for those of us in the US section. Those of us who are delegates to this Congress, as the Congress in Ghana, and I did not vote at that Congress, but somebody sounds like they are having a goldfish bowl swimming in their microphone. I don't know who that is. But I voted at the Centennial in The Hague. We vote every 3 years, we meaning all sections, vote on the international program, Dolores, and that hasn't changed. And what has changed, or what did happen this time, is decisions were made by the International Secretariat to use this canopy program and a consultant actually to get as much input as possible in advance for months and months and months in advance of this Congress from all of the sections, or as many people in the sections as possible. And you did not have to be a delegate to participate, but you did have to pay attention to information that was sent out to give input on what we thought was important for the international program. There is also a mission statement. And of course, then for process, there's the Constitution and bylaws. At the US section level, we have a mission and vision statement. We have still our 1985 statement of principles and policies that guides us. And we also vote, those of us who are active in the branches, as well as those of us who are active in program, either the National Program Committee and or the National Issues Committees, of which there are several. And in some cases, like for you and me and some others on this call, Berkeley or East Bay and San Francisco have a joint program core group and we take what the national level has given us as parameters, which is in some part based on the international parameters, and we put those kinds of policy issues into local focus. Our branch locally, the core group, really wanted to deal with disarmament issues. And so we put away the stuff that we were dealing with on the Middle East issues several years ago at a meeting, and we decided to move forward on disarmament and anti-military recruitment. So those things are going on all over the world. I think Janet is expressing frustration that she would like to know more about the particulars of how the Secretariat is using its budget to make all that happen. That's what I'm hearing from her.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. And Dee. Dee, please.
Hi. Okay. So I'm definitely much, newer to everything. And I think what I'm hearing is that there are a number of issues concerning initiative and communication that are going on, right? Like I would, I don't know, having one regional representative that covers so many different sections, it would probably put a lot on that representative to do a lot of the coordinating and liaisoning between the international board and the membership. There's also the new international board advisory position. I think that's meant to help. And so I'm not sure how that's going to factor into the communication between the board and the membership, but I believe that it was intended for just that express purpose to help with communication gaps. So we now have the regional representative who is supposed to be taking information from their different sections and conveying that information to the international board. And we also have an advisory position that's been communicated. And I hope that whoever takes whatever international advisory board position here will work closely with the regional representative. Once again, this is a matter of initiative. If we can't always get what we want from the one contact we have, we might try other avenues to get the information in order to be able to streamline the process of communication. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. And Cheryl, and then Sandy.
Yes, I would like to distinguish. Can you hear me? Yes. I would like to distinguish between projects and policy. So just looking at the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, okay, very quickly after that happened, our Secretary General, Madeleine Rees, with the help of some people, and I'm not sure who they were, issued the WILPF International's official statement on the invasion, condemning it and saying what we wanted to happen. So that is policy, okay? That is, I see, an important part of WILPF International because they are dealing with the United Nations. We have accreditation at the United Nations. The United Nations is supposed to listen to us. They wrote to the Secretary General and said what they wanted to happen with regard to Ukraine and Russia. So that is the policy end of WILPF International, which to me is probably our more important, our important process, and our influence on the world comes through things like that, statements that our Secretariat, our Secretary General makes about what's going on in the world. So please keep that in mind. There's projects and then there's policy. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Somebody else had a hand up, but they disappeared. So we do have.
I think Sandy had, right?
Sandy Thacker. Thank you. Sandy.
Yeah, I did have a question about. It's concerning to me the issues that Janet has raised around what I see as the Secretariat not wanting to to let people know, to let members and the International Board, who would then let their members know how these decisions are being made to spend the money that partly we send in to support the work of International. But if we don't know really how what decisions are being made and how they're being made, and have no input into that decision making at all, then how is this at all a democratic organization?
And that's kind of a rhetorical question, but a good one. Did you want an answer to that, Sandy?
Sure.
Does someone have an answer? And
I feel like if we have liaisons that are supposed to be representing us to the International Board, it's up to, that's their role, right? Is to communicate with the membership. You know, it would be more top down if the International Board was always reaching down directly into the different sections and, you know, putting everything, it would be kind of like jumping over the people that have leads that are appointed to do that, I feel.
Yeah, but what concerns me is that, you know, what Janet mentioned about just asking for information about the projects they sponsored, just knowing what they were and how they, and they wouldn't send that. I mean, that seems like, you know, it's a whole question of transparency.
Right, and I don't know enough about that. I would think that, like, if you know, with most of us, when we're working in teams, if we can't get an answer from someone, we go to someone else to get the answer, or we might ask during a meeting, you know, or something like that. But I don't know enough about that process to be able to speak on that.
I don't either. So thank you, Dee.
You're welcome. Communications major. So yeah, it's all about, you know, if you can't get it, you know, one avenue, you try another. And so I don't know how many avenues were tried or how many, you know, requests were sent out. If one request was sent to one person or multiple to multiple people, you know, perhaps the people speaking on that can answer that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Nielsen for the
wait. Could people please raise their hands? This is not free for all time.
It is.
So I see Nancy Price has her hand up, and Barbara Nielsen has her hand up, and Janet. And I do want to just say that officially this started at 5:30 and was due to end at 7. However, I agree with Cheryl, who says that we're covering some both important and interesting ground, so there is no urgency for us to wrap up. I thank everyone for participating tonight, and we actually have about 3/4 of the maximum number of people who were here at any time. So I am impressed by the endurance of our participants. So I'm going to call on people in the order that I see their hands up. So Nancy Price, you're next, then Barbara, then Janet, then Teresa. Nancy.
Yeah, thanks. Well, there is a note here in the chat from Sue to everyone. I think Janet should respond to the current questions. So I don't know if that was a most recent comment or not. But I guess I'll move forward with my comment. It seems to me that given a lot of what Janet said was in the proposals from the conversations with the consultants about not only transparency, but there were a lot of comments about how work could be better coordinated in a horizontal way between members and among sections that were working on similar projects or topics and had materials to share. Because while we do have a accreditation and there's a lot of work that goes on at the UN, for me, the opportunity missed in a way to really build a movement, many of the topics or on crucial topics or on root causes of foreign conflict as we try to implement peace and freedom, to really have the sort of bottom-up movement building that can go on, so that in countries that have sections, the local to the national level is strengthened, and the what needs to be worked on at the national level is important in order to build a movement from the national level to the international. So I guess this might be a question for Janet. I mean, I guess it's not that international doesn't yet consider that that's an important aspect of how to really achieve a lot of the objectives that are in the congressional program document.
Thank you. Janet, did you want to try to respond?
Well, I just, this is my current assessment after 4 years on the board, that really, hey, we in international, we're doing the best we can. We're doing really good work. Look at how much we've grown. We've gotten all of these enormous grants. And we know how this works better than you do, right? So we are designing our own programs, our own projects, etc. And we'll tell you what it is we're doing in a general kind of way. But I think you're absolutely right. And several of us on the IB like to talk about ourselves, about WILPF as a member-based organization. But I think that's going to have to mean that we organize and do it and show that we have the strength of a lot of members who want to do X, and bring that to international and say, we want you to put effort into doing X. Because it's very difficult. It's very difficult. Success now, I think, this is my analysis, is built on getting big grants. And, the big grantors are not going to want to take on certain issues. That's just how it is, right? When the biggest grantors at present are governments, well, they're, the ones that are funding WILPF are liberal governments, but they're not left. And they're not going to take on the Palestine-Israel issue, really.
So I'll jump in and thank you very much, Janet. Barbara has been waiting a long time. Quiet. And thank you for the question, Nancy. Okay, Barbara.
I would like to point out that, interestingly enough, we are looking to see from the United States some work that will be, we are looking toward having some support on about actions in the Middle East, which is in fact being worked on by international programs. Reaching Critical Will has been dealing with issues around Middle East weapons of mass destruction free zones, and there are topics that are involved in the Middle East peace women. But I know from my conversations with other members on the international board that Janet's feelings are not necessarily shared to the same degree of earnestness by everybody. And Janet has been very vocal in saying some very negative things about the Secretariat and the Secretary General, who has been able to get funding for WILPF that is allowing WILPF to be very successful in working with countries that have not traditionally been represented in WILPF. and in being creative at getting money from governments who have a mandate to give money to nonprofits who are doing good at the world, and having WILPF be attractive to those nonprofits. And that does not mean to the exclusion of dealing with real world issues. My sense has been that Janet's position is not, again, is her position, and she's certainly welcome to it. But I don't know how many of the 7 sections in our region know about her views. I know we know about it, but I think we need to look at a larger range of expressions of concern than just one person's. So I thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. Janet, I think Teresa has been waiting to talk. Did you want to respond to what was just said before we move on to Teresa?
Just to say that I express my views at the international board meetings and in regional meetings with other sections, with all the sections in our region.
Thank you. Okay, Teresa.
Well, I just want to say that Janet and others have to fight the tendency to be bureaucrats. Having worked for a very large bureaucracy, I do understand how hard it is to protect the democratic rights of members when you're working for the bureaucracy. And WILPF is a two-legged bureaucracy. And so I told Madeline Reese directly, she hasn't responded, but I did tell her directly when at the end of the Congress, she put forward a proposal. And I was really glad that Heidi objected, and I called it bureaucratic overreach, that she would do that. The whole business around the investigations, and people who are for democracy have to stand up to it. And that is what's going on, because the money is co-opting WILPF. So when you get money from governments, it's a way to co-opt your feminist peacemaking. So when you're getting money from nuclear powers and other things, you know, it's just so clear to me, because I'm a bottom-up organizer, and I know when people are being co-opted. And just that description of where the money comes from says that that is a real threat to our ability to do the work we need to do. And on the question of no NATO, which I think Regina asked, the no NATO working group decided to continue away from disarm. We are not associated with the disarm committee, but we agreed at our meeting on August 15th to continue. And so people who want to advance the official position of WILPF International to say no to NATO, they need to be a part of this, but do not allow us to be co-opted by bureaucrats. Over.
Thank you. And I have to say that it is my understanding that we have an issue committee, the Disarm Issue Committee, that addresses issues of war and disarmament. That's what No to NATO is about. So I would expect that the Disarm Committee would be the ones continuing No to NATO work. We don't have work outside of issue committees when there's an issue committee that's working on the issue. Okay, Robin Lloyd.
Yeah, okay. I have 3 small questions. One is, I did not get to the second session. I got to the first. It was wonderful. The second, I understand there was a lot of conflict. The whole discussion today, I still have no understanding what that was about. And, you know, it was about elections and then investigation and the PEEP. But maybe we're never to understand that. Okay, that's just one point. Second, I find it mysterious that there is an international vice president from the United States who is not on this call. And why don't we ever see her? And third, I was a delegate of WILPF at the Treaty Prohibiting Nuclear Weapons in New York. the WILPF office has a telephone. The office itself is closed. No one answers the phone. This is a marvelous opportunity for bringing WILPF members from different countries who were in New York City for the most important issue in front of the world and in front of our organization, mainly controlling nuclear weapons. And there was absolutely no effort to bring us together, to connect us. I was really, frankly, appalled by that. Those are my 3 points.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and respond to some of what you just asked, Robin. First, we unfortunately had a breakdown in communications and were unable to invite Melissa with enough advance notice for her to have a reasonable amount of notice to possibly participate. And it's true that Melissa has not been in communications with the U.S. section at all in the last 4 years, with the exception of one time when she came to the Bay Area to speak at a private girls' school. And there was a wonderful opportunity for people to hear from her and meet with her. But in the past, international board members who were from the U.S. section had a somewhat closer relationship with the U.S. section. That has not been the case with Melissa, and unfortunately there were some bad feelings that were left over from her time on the board, which may have contributed to that. Also, I think that you're quite right in your summary about the second business session at the Congress, that it was a very complicated and involved situation that I don't think we should try to go into here. So, Mary, I know you would like to try, but I think it would be very challenging. If you want to try to respond to that in 1 minute, you're certainly welcome to do so, Mary. I'll call on you next. And I apologize, Robin, but I forgot your third question, but I didn't have an answer to it in any case, and maybe someone else does. Robin? You're muted, Robin.
That the WILPF office in New York was completely closed while we were there and wanting to meet other WILPF members from other countries, and there was no effort to bring us together.
Yeah, that is deeply disturbing. So, Mary, do you want to, in 1 minute, respond to Robin?
Well, I want to respond to Janet as well, and Barbara, that in the U.S., what I brought to the presidency was the fact of grassroots movement. And that's where I come from. And believe me, I have international connections, quite a few, and we worked together in this nominating committee as international women. And we are concerned about the level of bureaucracy and undemocratic movements we see in WILPF. So Janet is not alone, believe me. And I want to make sure that you understand that, as far as I was concerned, what the Madeline did preemptively strike against us before the election, that us being the nominating committee, was unprecedented and was anti-democratic. And I think that this is a legitimate avenue of discussion, because as Janet has very clearly stated, we have different aims, and we have a great deal of tension between grassroots movement, as Teresa was mentioning, and it doesn't have to be that way, is what I would like to say. It does not have to be that way.
Thank you, Mary. Dee, you're up.
Okay, so I have a number of points that I wanted to make very quickly. I feel like, newer member or not, I am 51 years old. I do have experience in organizations, both paid and volunteer. Having done so, I know that there are two sides to every story. I was very impressed by the leadership and their responsiveness to member inquiries. I feel that you get what you give. And if you come across to people as demanding and rude, perhaps that's what you'll get back. If there's no response to our communications, we document it with respect and we try again. And, whatever approach we'll get the results that we want. And then a long list of proven, attempts at communications, would perhaps make the case a lot stronger than just saying, well, I asked and nobody gave me what I wanted. I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I think everyone else here probably knows leadership is always assumed to be bureaucratic and top down. It's the fashion these days. Anyone that's ever been in leadership knows that it's impossible to please all of the people all of the time. So perception is everything. And the key is to give people the same benefit of a doubt. How do you lead when attempts at leadership is misportrayed and undermined constantly? So I feel like if we implement more effective communication techniques, perhaps there's no need to get people up in arms by lobbing accusations, but instead, do the communication and outreach that we want to see occur. We can initiate that. We have that power. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Dee, and thank you for being concise. Cheryl.
Yes, I see Teresa has chosen to bring up a topic that I didn't think was pertinent to this evening's meeting, but she's brought it up, and so I'm going to tell you what I think should happen. Teresa and George have decided to leave the Disarm Committee for the second time. And I said, if you want to keep being the leaders on that committee, then you have to find a different home for the No NATO committee, working group. If you want to find somebody else who is staying on the Disarm Committee to be the leader of that No NATO group, then it can stay within the Disarm Committee. I recalled that in the past, I led some solidarity actions that did not sit in a particular committee. I worked outside the committee structure. I dealt with the branches directly, and I suggested that if No NATO wished to continue outside the Disarm Committee, that they needed to check with the board, with our WILPF US board, whether they were allowed to do that. I did my solidarity actions and the call for peace solidarity action outside of any issue committee. And so it can be done, Darian. I think Teresa and George have to petition to the board to be allowed to do that. I'm happy for them to continue their work outside the Disarm Committee. So that's my situation, my explanation of where we're at with the No NATO committee. I've heard a rumor that they might want the Black Liberation Caucus to take it over, but my understanding is only Black people are allowed to be members of the Black Liberation Caucus, and that would not work. We have, I believe, in the working group currently, there are several members who are not Black, and so I think it could not be run by the Black Liberation Caucus. Maybe that's a rumor that's not true. So,
okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Cheryl, for that explanation. Barbara, I just want to call on Regina before you because she hasn't spoken at all this evening, and then I'll call on you. So I hope.
Good evening. I wanted to make some general comments about how I felt about the Congress being the first time I attended one. And the plus side was being able to attend. I wouldn't have gone to Australia. Some of the parts that were negatives for me were that practically the first thing I was introduced to was this election issue. And that kind of derailed a lot of stuff going on the first weekend. And then at the second weekend, after there were several different working, presentations, one was called governance. And in that governance meeting, they kind of report back about the elections occurred. And the meeting had to close and it wasn't concluded. And unfortunately, it was stuck on the agenda for the farewell, the last gathering, where the switch of officers, the election results, all of that were presented. And unfortunately, that discussion continued there. And it kind of sucked all the energy out of the Congress for me. And I actually sent a message to Madeline Reese, through chat, saying I actually felt connected in a way that I hadn't to the international organization since the 1980s, basically. And now I didn't have the same level of interest in pursuing some things. And she wrote back saying she was sorry that had happened. But I think that the Canopy platform offered many opportunities for real engagement, but it wasn't used very well because I don't think old WILPF members had used that kind of platform before, weren't understanding the potential of it. So I felt that there were a lot of opportunities where I would have loved to have had smaller group conversations. Some were set up. I went there to the chat and there was no one there. So that was kind of a disappointing, but I think overall it was good to have the experience. And I think we all see that there are a lot of issues to work through. I'm hoping that the US section will take a real good look at the platform and the issues we're involved in and see how we can be more supportive of particularly the new African sections. I think there's some exciting possibilities to do some work there, and which in the United States, we have a lot of responsibility to make sure that Africa doesn't get militarized. Thank you for allowing me to speak a little longer.
Thank you. And of course, in the United States, my impression is that AFRICOM is making sure that Africa does get militarized. But that's an issue for the Disarm Committee. Barbara.
Thank you. I just, since this has come up a couple of different times, I was very disappointed and saddened that people who had US section members who had gone to the NPT, who were very excited about it. I know when I have gone to the Commission on the Status of Women, it's very exciting, thousands of people around, but it's very easy for us, since the New York office of International, which houses Peace Women and Reaching Critical Will in particular, in the building across the street from the General Assembly building of the UN, we tend to look at that as if it's in our backyard. But the people who work there or did when they were going into the office, that's where they do their work for International, but they do it actually mostly in engaging with the General Assembly and the others who are involved in these very large meetings. And I didn't ever get a sense from talking with Alison Pitleck in particular, because she was the primary person since Ray Atchison became ill with COVID when she had been in Vienna, I guess. They're not working in the office. They're doing their work with the United Nations using the remote electronic access that they do on a day in, day out basis when they're working to do their daily work for WILPF. And so it never would have occurred to me to try to walk up or take the elevator up to the 6th floor and knock on the door of the space there, expecting that we would find WILPF staffers there, because they weren't there. They were doing their work remotely. And I understand that it's a really big deal and very exciting to see them. I mean, I enjoy doing it in March when I've been able to go and they've been there. But I don't want the people who are on this call who aren't familiar with all this stuff to walk away with a sense that, oh dear, International's not doing their job again, because that's not true. Those staffers for those two programs in particular work their butts off. And the fact that they're not in a local New York office when our people are coming for the non-proliferation treaty meetings, which finally got to be held in person, that's very unfortunate, but that doesn't mean that those staffers aren't doing their jobs. And I really hope the other people who are listening to this can understand that. They're working their butts off for WILPF, and they just don't happen to be there. So thank you so much.
I don't think anyone is saying they're not doing their job. A question that this raises in my mind is there were a lot of WILPF members in New York for the NPT, and the job of WILPF International would seem to me to have been to provide some kind of connection and staffing for the people who are there. But
except that the staff, they're very minimally staffed. And the office manager, I think, is in Alaska full time. He's doing it all remotely. And during the day, when our people would have gone like between sessions, our reaching critical WILPF staff people are scrambling, trying to catch up on what they're doing, keeping track of what's going on with the presentations. I mean, it was very similar to what goes on at the CSW, although there are more people around for that. But
okay,
there you go. So it is.
Could I just?
It's not their job to host visiting family. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, I think. Although they never said that out loud.
Yeah, Robin, I'll give you just a few seconds.
Just to respond. I'm not asking them to respond to just us Americans. I'm saying WILPF should be working to bring a movement together. There ought to be someone on the international staff who does outreach to WILPF members, not US members, but all the other people from other countries that came and put us together. And so we can build this organization. It isn't just going to the United Nations. I mean, I've been reading Ray's reports. They're incredible. It would drive me crazy to sit in the sessions and transcribe what they're doing. And I'm very impressed, but there should be someone on staff, 40 people on International WILPF staff, that one person could be in charge of, relating to members.
But they're in Geneva.
Okay, so I'm not going to continue.
I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah. So at this
point, don't have to be in Geneva. They're here too.
Right. And I tend to agree with you very much, Robin. We could have worked in collaboration with WILPF International if the problem was finding a staff person to help with the NPT. WILPF International is a big organization, has a lot of staff people. It seems like they could have put something together for the NPT. But this call was about the International WILPF Congress, and we have covered a wide range of topics and kept people here much longer than I had anticipated would be the case. We're down to about half of our maximum people here, so I think this is a good point to wrap up. Thank you, everyone. And I will be closing Ellen will be closing the meeting in a short moment, but we'll leave it open so people can access the chat. Thank you to all the delegates. Thank you to people who were not in the delegation who helped in other ways. And it was another remarkable Congress where US WILPF members were able to attend in a way they've never been able to before. So that was one of the most outstanding parts of a virtual WILPF Congress. Okay, thank you, everybody.